Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do. In this episode, I interview Robert Dilworth, Executive Director of the Digital Leaders Exchange at the Liquid Legal Institute, whose transition from 35 years in corporate law to leading legal innovation shows that the best careers never really end, they evolve. Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm Tom Martin, your host, and I'm really thrilled today to have on Robert Dilworth. He is the Executive Director of the Digital Leaders Exchange at the Legal Liquid Institute, and he's also a fellow at the Cambridge Judge Business School. And he lives in Germany. He is doing some really interesting work. I had the pleasure of seeing him again recently in person at a conference, and I thought, you know what? I think everyone needs to hear Robert's story because it's really intriguing and inspiring. And Robert, with that, how are you doing today?
Very well. Greetings from Hamburg, a cold, snowy northern Germany. For the last several weeks.
Yeah, I can imagine. There's been a bit of a cold snap going on. A lot of friends in the Northeast, and even as far as Texas, have gotten their share of snow and cold.
I'm pleased to join today, and I thank you for this invitation. I'm an admirer of your podcast and of your interview style, so it's an honor to be asked.
Well, thank you, Robert. I am curious about what you're doing. We saw each other at the Legal Innovators conference that Richard Tromans puts on. It's a wonderful series that is now expanding to Paris this year.
Yes.
So it's nice to have an excuse. I think my wife and I are going to both attend that one.
Well, that has not escaped my notice. That is in Paris. Yeah, and I think I saw you also in San Francisco at one. So you might see me at that one. Although there was some other activities, there was a hackathon at Cambridge the next day, and but no, then there's a very good excuse for a trip, though.
One thing that that you mentioned I think you actually spoke. You presented at one of the sessions that had to do with the Legal Liquid Institute, and I just wanted, tell us a little bit about what that is.
Liquid legal, I think the liquid part is the notion of making the law a bit more fluid and able to maybe that's an engineering perspective, I don't know, but water goes where it's needed and in different forms, and the legal system is not as agile, is more rigid than society really needs. So that's the idea, I guess, behind the name. It was founded about 2017 or 18 in Germany. It's an independent, nonprofit, global think tank. It's neutral. It's not, it's not allied, with the public sector, or not allied with the commercial sector. We have about 1,500 members in various categories. So we have individual members who pay dues. You have members who are with corporate and law firm members, and we have many people who may work in law firms or corporates or vendors and join in their individual capacity. But we're about 1,500 and in more than 20 countries. As I said, we're neutral. We're interdisciplinary, so we have a lot of technologists. We have academics. We don't have just lawyers. We try to reject the lawyer versus non-lawyer distinction. We're happy to have non-lawyers who may have interesting perspectives about the problem sets that we have in legal services. And our goal is to design a more human-centered and tech-enabled future for the law in the service of civil society. And you say think tank, it's a fancy word. we're an applied think tank in the sense that we try to think tank because we try to bring in intellectual rigor, but we want it with a view to a result, with a practical outcome that will improve how law and legal system serve society. And then we have different activities within it. The Digital Leaders Exchange is one of them. That was formerly Digital Legal Exchange that Mark Cohen, Bill Deckelman, and Michelle DeStefano had founded, also 2017 or 18. And last year we moved it just institutionally or structurally over to LLI because we have a little bit more of an administrative and support structure. And because there were a lot of synergies in terms of goals and methods, and everyone decided that it would make much more sense to kind of work together. And so we did that the beginning of April. And as I retired from Bank of America, um, a number of these roles kind of accelerated my decision to go ahead and make career transition. So I did that in May of 2025. One of my roles is to kind of nurture the DLE within this new structure and try to adapt it now for 2026, knowing that it's a different world than in 2020 or before when we were trying to preach our message, particularly to general counsels and their corporations about transformation, and now I think more of them have that message. So we're more, to the hard yards and the how, not the whether, and the why. So, and I think general counsels and their leadership teams have more opportunities, than 5 or 6 years ago, if they're interested in these things. So we're trying to recalibrate so it's a compelling for today, given that environment.
Well,
So that's one of the things I do. There are other things, but you mentioned also that I am an honorary fellow at Cambridge. That came my way and also helped me in my decision, because I was offered an opportunity to work on some projects through the business school that are at the intersection of AI and financial services regulation. And since I spent my career as a lawyer in financial services institutions mainly, that appealed to me, and the ability to bring a legal perspective, but to be a part of some interdisciplinary projects. And so that's kind of the big picture of what occupies me. And then, of course, there becomes the question, maybe we'll talk about that later, about balance and, how you do all that, being consistent with moving your life across the Atlantic and calling yourself retired and things like that.
yeah. Well, we'll get to that towards the end. I'm sure everyone could use that insight about how to balance things. But okay, so what I'm hearing, the Liquid Legal Institute, when I did some research on it to prepare for us talking today, like it looks like a lot of the functions that it has under its aegis is kind of similar to what like a state bar association in the states does. Like there's an educational element, there's the camaraderie, there's also like bringing together different like particular practice groups to talk about things. But it makes a lot of sense now that you mentioned that the goal, like the purpose of it has been to instill in lawyers more of a forward thinking, liquid, fluid, curious type of mindset to help transition and transform the industry into one that's more useful for getting clients the results that they want. Is that
And
fair?
yeah, and that's fair. That's fair enough. And some of the adjectives that you used are not adjectives that are used with respect to, you know, all that many bar associations, though. And it's not to criticize bar associations, but you know, you know what I mean. Even within in jurisdictions that have very well developed and strong bar associations, there are tensions with respect to change, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so there's
when
definitely a
and
need.
how and the pace and why and in whose interest.
So I could see where there's definitely a need for like an alternative that is focused on the uncertainty, that's focused on the transformation, that's focused on the future. I've had just a couple of interactions in Germany where like I've presented a couple of times and talked to local lawyers, and I know that Germany, and it may have changed in a couple of years, but I doubt it. But they seem to be a little bit more conservative in terms of their approach to technology and incorporating it within their practice more so than I've experienced within the United States, which seems to be a bit more a bit more responsive, a little more market driven. Of course, there's a lot of lawyers in the States that are also like not really leaning into the change, but it seemed like more of a, a cultural thing with German lawyers that they definitely are very metered and careful. And
I think with some, I think I've seen that a little less with those that work in the, at least this is my perspective over the last 5 or 6 years, those that work in the corporate sector, because the corporate sector is much more likely to be influenced by the culture of the and priorities of the company itself and its openness to innovation and change if you want to be successful in that environment. Uh, Maybe so with respect to some lawyers in private practice. But ultimately, those lawyers in private practice, and we see this in the U.S. and other places. Yeah, they all have clients and corporate clients. I've heard this statistic. Maybe I've heard it first from Casey Flaherty, but anyway, I've cited it before. That more than 50% of legal spending globally is by corporations. So ultimately, corporations and their client needs, they're the buyer. Can ultimately they express what their priorities are and what they would like to see from their service providers. And I think that's one of the reasons why you're starting to see some more accelerated change.
and the focus of the Liquid Legal Institute and your work there is on in-house counsel, right? It's like transactional lawyers mostly.
Well, and the DLE part, it is, but within the institute, it's all aspects of the practice of law. There are people who are focused on improving the performance of the public sector, like the development of legislation, regulation, efficiency of the public sector, administration, efficiency of the courts and court system, which obviously has access to justice uh, component. So it's not strictly limited to private practice or to in-house and corporate, but at the Leaders Exchange, we do have that kind of focus on in-house counsels in multinational corporations.
I do want to get into what makes you tick, your background and your origin story. And I know the audience likes to learn more about people personally. And not to get too personal, but I do want to ask you about where you grew up and stuff. And I know that currently you're in Hamburg, uh, but did you grow up there? Like where?
No, not at all. No. Life is you kind of can look backwards at a certain point, and then you can kind of understand more how you got where you got to. I think and Kierkegaard said that life must be lived forwards, but can only be understood backwards. Or you can understand your journey better, once you're pretty far into it, and actually can see that there were maybe precursors along the way. There were signals, and so it kind of makes sense. But but to get to your point, and your question, I grew up in the U.S. Most of my youth was in Georgia, in the Atlanta area. I I left there in 1982 when I got a fellowship to Columbia to an LLM at the law school at Columbia. So I lived away from there more um, than I lived there growing up. And one thing led to another. That was an opportunity to study in New York and then just study in Paris. And we've got a law degree in Paris. And then after having done all that, it made sense for me to go back to New York to start my career. And I did that at Cleary Gottlieb for about 6 years. And at first I thought, well, I'll do that for a couple of years and you'll get, in 5 years, you can get the training that you would get anywhere else in 10 years, or in 3 years, you'll get, 6 years of training, whatever, and you can go back any other place. But it came a point in my life where after a couple of years in New York, I woke up and thought, well, this kind of feels normal. I feel like a New Yorker. I'm not sure that I can go back, right? So,
Yeah.
so I did that, and had opportunities that led me to uh, when I left there to work for Deutsche Bank in New York, and to go to I worked for about a year and a half in Frankfurt in the headquarters, and then went back before I started Bank of America. And I kind of thought my life was going to be more due to the early experience in France and with French as my first foreign language, uh, more in that direction. But life had other plans, and the opportunities were first with a German company, and then I met a nice German American woman, and that changed my life. And that expanded my my horizons tremendously, because this was just not something necessarily been in my contemplation to have like a third language and third culture, and a third place where I could feel at home and have set relationships. That has been a wonderful turn that I could have never contemplated. But so that's kind of how the kind of German part of or chapter of life started.
Let's unpack that a little bit because there's a lot. Um,
Yeah.
the first of which is just starting at the beginning. You said Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia?
Hmm.
Okay. And were you in the city? Like, what was your little neck of the woods like when you were growing up as a kid?
We were in a very close suburb until I was maybe 13 or 14, that adjoined the city limits, and then we moved a little further out into the suburbs, and finished high school there. And I went to college in Atlanta as a commuter at a small liberal arts school, and then
Oglethorpe, right?
yes, and then uh, to law school, and went to the University of Georgia in Athens, and did well there. And I was very fortunate, and this is the question that I tell young people about this, to be open to recognizing an opportunity and a break when you see it. Uh, I I had a number of professors who had gone to Columbia, a visiting professor from Columbia who took an interest in me, and I had an interest in applying to a fellowship at Columbia that would be a multi-year thing. And I didn't do that at first. I applied for something else because I didn't feel that I could have my language fluency. Actually, based on, I guess, conversations you know between Columbia and the faculty members there, it resulted in my receiving a phone call to ask me whether they could convert my application to the thing that I myself had excluded myself from. And they said, "Your interests sound like this, and that you really belong over here." And one thing led to another, and being asked to come up to New York for interviews with them, and being in that wonderful environment, and then going on and doing a similar thing in Paris in a graduate law program, a course for a doctorate, and in an environment where I was effectively the only non-French student, or a person with a non-French legal background,
That was
which
the
was,
Sorbonne, right?
yeah, that was
Yeah.
yeah, and that was a tremendous amount of work. But one of the most rewarding experiences I've had, to be in that environment, and to do reasonably well, and to expand my horizons further.
That's so key. It's something that I've shared with my daughters and also to law students that I have the pleasure of teaching now at Suffolk Law is the idea of optionality, right? Like when you make life choices, that if you can pick either, educational institutions or jobs where it gives you greater degrees of freedom, the better. And so like it's just interesting like that you initially made a choice which limited you from something that actually you would be better suited for, and they recognized that and put you in the right spot. And so I think for a lot of people, and I know I've done that myself, is oh well that I could do that, and just no, just ask for the moon. Try to do what.
I tell my own children, and other people, well, usually life is the big no, or if it's not the big no, it's, yes, but later. Like when raising children, we say this all the time, no, and not now, but maybe later. But this happens in life as well. They often get the no, or they're not yet. But rarely is something just given, out of the sky. You at least have to ask. You at least have to reach, right? And not assume that you'll get the no. You might, but you won't always get the no. The other thing I see in retrospect, when you're 22, 23, 24, 25, in that age range, you may have a telescoped view of the world and life and think, well, I can't do that. I can't take the 6 months to go this, or I can't go do this program. I can't take this year because uh, I need to get in the workforce. And certainly there can be economic and student loans, similar reasons why that's really important, but or necessary. But in the big scheme of things, 6 months of your life or a year or 2 years abroad or doing something that's going to be very enriching at a time when that might be one of the last times in your life that it's actually easy to do. It goes to your point about optionality, right? That, to recognize, well, wait a minute, world's not going to come to end if you start, your job as an associate in a law firm a year later, right?
Yeah.
Or 2 years later, or if you decide, well, I'd like to go get this master's degree, or I would like to, to go on a around the world trip, whatever. Sure, some people might, think less of that choice that you'd immediately, go to make money. I think, in retrospect, I could have, taken a little more time to finish a doctorate or whatever, which I didn't do because I thought, well, no, I need to come back and get trained and get on the hamster wheel, the career hamster wheel. But
Well,
so I try to tell young people when I mentor them, that you're not going to regret it, and this is actually one of the last clear chances that you'll have to do some of these things.
let's jump back a little bit. I'm just curious about, did you have a big family? What did your mom and dad do? Like, what was that any like if you had a big family, where you fell in it, and also, what kind of stuff your parents did? Was that any inspiration for you as to what you're doing now, or what you did next?
Well, that's interesting. My father had been trained as a chemist and chemical engineer, which wouldn't have had any kind of bearing that I would have thought on my direction, uh, except he was pretty analytical and logical. So I see in retrospect, I couldn't see that at the time. I can see now he's no longer with us. Neither of my parents are, but I can see now kind of subtle influence of where, in looking backwards, I can see how there's some of that is in me and and influenced me. My mother, um, you know, was a housewife and did various other kinds of part-time work and volunteer efforts work. When my brother and I, to your point, we were a reasonably small family, just two siblings. My brother's 2.5 years younger. What I remember most, I think, in terms of her influence on me was uh, she was very, especially for the time in which I grew up in 1960s and mid 70s, in the sense of giving me a sense, an affirming sense that there was very little in life I couldn't do if I really wanted to do it and wanted to would put my mind to it. And also that whatever it is that I chose to do didn't matter that much, to her or them, as long as it was what resonated with me, and that I would give 100% or 1,000% of everything I had to be as good as I could be at whatever that choice was. And so I think that gave me a good base of self-confidence, not an excess base, but a solid base, you know, to take those little steps, and recognize opportunities, when they presented themselves along the way, and then have, some of the courage to take them, and then figure out what to do next and what to do after that. And
I think that's wonderful that you grew up in that environment because it's one that's a real unlock for the possible. That when you get that sense of security from your parents that you could do anything you set your mind to, and that it's okay to do something that's what you enjoy doing versus something that you feel you have to do. And I think like that's reflected in your career is that you've made a lot of interesting choices about um, studying in different places, different subjects, and you know, it all comes full circle now, I think, with where you're living now and the work that you're doing, essentially trying to instill in lawyers out there the same curiosity and open mindset and believe, potentiality that they can accomplish what they want to if they just set their mind to it.
I hope I'm a good example of that. Right now, I'm having moved across the Atlantic, and um, we're still getting settled, but it's much better now than a few months ago. I feel like I'm a living experiment in kind of radical adaptation at my career point and age to, um, kind of pick up everything. Even though I was coming to an environment that was pretty well known and had set of relationships and good starting point. So I hope other people can see, and people who are my contemporaries can see that it's not too late to reinvent yourself if you're so inclined. And I felt, you know, say starting about 5 years ago, I guess in the pandemic, part of that time was spent in Germany in lockdowns. The second wave of lockdowns came, and we were here to see about relatives. And so we stayed. And so what I thought would be 3 weeks became 5 weeks and then became 10 or 11 months. And I started to give more thought about myself and my purpose and my life, like a lot of people did. And I started to think about, the legal system. And I witnessed the events of January 6th over in Germany, and started to really have a lot of questions about how, you know, people who are members of the bar and elected representatives can, justify some of those things, and the kinds of things in society that could make some of our citizens uh, either participate in such things or rationalize and justify that. And I started to think more about the gaps in, I guess, civic education and respect for the rule of law and why some of that might be. And I kind of got on a little quest to try to understand that better, and then or to attempt to get my head around it in terms of contributors. And along that way, I came to realize that the legal system does not serve people all that well, and particularly with respect to uh, civil legal services that most people can't afford, and that the kinds of things that are in my DNA and my blood may not be in everyone's DNA and their blood and natural to them, from dawn until dusk in terms of their way of thinking. But rather, it's just a very kind of abstract thing, this notion of, uh, rule of law. That got me thinking more about, do I have any role in this? Am I not in an active way complicit, but are there things that I can do even at this stage of my career to at least help in a little way? It was just a good confluence of timing and influences, uh, because I was here in Hamburg, and one of the law schools here, the Bucerius Law School, it's a private law school in Hamburg. It was a very has a very well-known center on legal tech and data science that Professor Dan Katz is an academic director of. Yeah, and they were in an online mode then because of the pandemic. But I got involved, and I started following things, and then we had presentations by people like Bill Henderson and Richard Susskind and other people, and I became drawn into that, and then been started to connect the dots, and I came to a point where I thought, well, I can keep my head down and do nothing and say nothing and kind of coast to retirement in 5 years or whatever, or I can go back after lockdowns and try to get more involved in my legal department and try to promote more of innovation culture. And so I felt that for me, it was authentic to try to do that, right? And so I committed a few years to doing that. Had some traction. Gen AI was definitely a catalyst that helped in that. I think by the time I left, I felt that I had done a good thing, and for my colleagues, and I had also opened up an entire new world to myself, for myself, and for my wife, because she's gotten involved in some of these activities in the LLI. We have a charitable fund, and we do some things that are more student oriented that she's involved with.
Well,
But I just crafted that so that by the time I left, I felt I'm not. It's not just that I'm leaving something that I've maybe had enough of, and it's had its role in my life, but I also have something that's pulling me. Right? So I have a pull, and it's not just you know 27 years is enough in a given job, and there's the push, that's kind of what you want to leave, but you've got something that's actually attracting you that you're excited about.
because I want to point out to the audience that you had 27 years at Bank of America as managing director and associate general counsel. Like you could have retired comfortably and just done that, but you chose the challenge to be open to the new and to get involved. I recently spoke with Tara Waters, and she
Mm-hmm.
had this
Yeah,
incredible,
yeah.
yeah, she had this
Go ahead.
incredible insight about applying Newton's laws to transformation and thinking about innovation. And the first law is that a body in motion tends to stay in motion, a body at rest tends to stay at rest. And I think that was a brilliant insight that Tara applied to legal, because I think what you just described is a great example of staying in motion. The question I have for you is, where does that come from? You could have just taken it easy, gone on some cruises, you know, retired. Like, what was it? Like, what in you felt like? Where does that come from that you wanted to stay in motion?
I may, appropriate to this phase of life, want to be a little less in motion, but I don't want to be, in activity. And it took several years, but starting the pandemic, when I started to think about next 5 years of my life and kind of getting closer to the typical retirement phase, I knew I couldn't go from going 200 miles an hour for decades to going 0 miles an hour, but that I needed to be in motion. I just maybe needed to be in a little less motion, or motion, but with maybe a greater degree of purpose and intentionality as to the destination of the motion.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that it wouldn't work for me, to not have a plan, right, or to not have something that had some purpose, right, so I could still feel engaged and related to my profession, and still, doing some good and continuing to grow intellectually, because that's key to, I think, anyone's longevity, uh, is having some stimulating activities and relationships. And so that was one of the appeals, right? So part of it was kind of knowing my own wiring, and other part was just, it was actually appealing, and I cared, and I believed, and taking time to make things better, because you know the profession gave me opportunities in life that I could have never imagined growing up in the Atlanta suburbs. I've done so many things and had so many opportunities that I just would never dreamed of, and that's even from just having spent most of my life in a corporate legal practice. Uh, but the security that came from that allowed me to have a life that I had not contemplated. And I'm very grateful for that, and for all that the profession has given. And I feel that it's appropriate to want to give back, and to want to not only improve the system, but to help young people uh, along their way in making their career decisions and launching their careers. These activities are ways in which I'm able to do that.
Let me ask you a couple questions I ask of every guest because, like you, they have a lot going on, and even now, like I've seen you at multiple conferences. You're involved as executive director, um, and also a fellow. And so, like, there's many balls that you're juggling up in the air, and I was wondering, like, how do you do it? Like, how do you keep a work-life balance? How do you keep it all straight and live a happy life? How does that work?
Well, it's not easy. It requires, it's one of the things that, I wouldn't say that I do it especially well. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's something that's learned. And I think in legal practice, and certainly in a corporate legal practice, in-house, I chose that. But you're responsive to the clients. You're driven by, everything's driven by someone else's needs and the timing of those needs, and you're responsive for that. And it's the service function, and that comes with the territory. And your days can be totally rearranged by your clients. Whereas, um, now, yes, I did choose to get involved in activities, and when you get involved in activities with other people, yes, there are externalities that can change the course of your day, and things that come up that will cause a rejuggling of priorities. But at least these are things that I picked out of appeal, out of their intrinsic appeal to me. Uh, and I do have some agency, and other people who have been a few years ahead of me in this process have advised me, like Mark Cohen's one of them, is that to learn over time, that out of all the things that are interesting to you and you do want to say yes to, you have to learn to say no to some, so that you still have the capacity to have more balanced life that's appropriate to your phase in life, uh, and to be able to do your best at the ones you say yes to. Right. So I think it's something that that I and my wife as well are trying to look to learn, which is being selective and intentional in the things we say yes to and that we take on, so that they make sense, and that and that we do them well, and give our all and make an effective contribution, versus being more scattered.
Well, I'm still learning that myself.
No, I'm not saying it's
Yeah,
easy. I
yeah.
mean, and
No, no, no. But
especially today, because there's so many distractions, and there's so many, but there are also so many opportunities and so many needs. All
yeah,
right, so it's very easy to have the problem. That's a problem that I
yeah,
think many of our viewers have that too, right?
yeah. Actually, that question leads me to the next question, the last one I had really, which is after you're doing all of these things, pursuing these different activities, what makes it worthwhile for you?
What makes it worthwhile? Well, one of the things that has made it worthwhile is, um, at least in these activities, is working with such a variety of people of different ages and generations, some of which, and some of them are from other disciplines. I found in the last 5 or 6 years that I've been involved in legal innovation and transformation activities and initiatives, just the most wonderful group of people, with just very slight exception. I'm not even sure I can think of any strong exception of people that are hopeful and optimistic, and many that are pretty selfless, and they still have some idealism to them. Um, Regardless of the decades that they may have been working, um, and they inspire me, and they give me a lot of energy, and the interactions with them has been so refreshing and invigorating to me. That's so for people well established in their jobs and in their practices, but uh, it's also true with respect to younger people. I've enjoyed uh, working and helping students, and I've had a few uh, mentor-mentee relationships, and I have to say that I get as much back from that as, and maybe more than I actually give to the young people who may ask if I'll be their mentor, or I'll give them some advice, or can be consulted with from time to time. I encourage people to develop relationships like that, because if their experience is like mine, you'll get at least as much back as you put in.
I think that's wonderful, and hope and optimism is something that we definitely need more of in the world today. And I think it's a inspiring story, yours, Robert. And I just want to thank you so much for spending time with me on the show today.
Well, I thank you again for having me. I really enjoy this conversation and all that I've learned about other people who are active in this area, yeah, through your interviews and through your writings.
I appreciate that. For everyone in the audience who's listened to this and wants to learn more about you, the Liquid Legal Institute, and everything else, and keep in touch with you and follow you, how would they do that?
Well, I'm active on LinkedIn, so that's pretty easy to find me under Robert Dilworth with a 1L. And I have my main email address, a very simple one, which is Robert at Dilworth, 1L, and then .de. Uh, so those are probably the two easiest ways. So I encourage people to write or to connect over LinkedIn if they'd like to develop a conversation.
Well, and I encourage you to reach out to Robert. I think he has a lot to teach, and he has a great story that we should always be open to the new. So thank you again, Robert. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
And to all of you watching, thank you so much for tuning in. See you next time. Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.